Yeah, I'm an aerospace engineer, and I'm also president of the Mars Society, which is an international organization pushing for the human exploration and settlement of Mars. We're having our own convention in October 5th through 8th at Arizona State University. You can find out about it or join the Mars Society at marssociety.org. And if you want to get a copy of my book, The Case for Mars, we got them here. They'll be right outside the door at the end of the talk. You buy them, I'll sign them. It's a win-win situation. But the topic I'm going to talk about today is not so much how we can get to Mars, but what will happen after we do, okay? What can we create on the red planet? That is fundamentally the question. Okay, one can debate, will we get to Mars in 10 years, will it take 30? But in a historical point of view, it's a blink. The real question now is, what will we create when we get there, okay? And that's what I'm going to talk about. And by the way, that's the subject of my next book called The New World on Mars, which is coming out next spring, okay? So, thought I'd mention that. Okay, so, as I said, it's soon going to be possible to get to Mars, and for a lot of people to get to Mars. Okay, what you're seeing here, of course, is a test of the SpaceX Starship, okay, which has had a variety of tests so far. Not a full orbital, successful attempt at orbit yet, but that's going to happen again soon, and that may very well fail, but if so, they'll try again a couple of months after that, and again a couple of months again after that, because SpaceX's methodology is build, fly, crash, figure out what went wrong, fly again, get a little further into the flight envelope, do the next, okay, until they get it. And if they are successful, we will have fully reusable spaceships reaching orbit with Saturn V class payloads by this time next year. Okay, by the time the next president is elected, this is going to be a new reality in the world. Now, and if they continue successfully, first humans will be on Mars within a decade. Now, Musk is a bit erratic, and very forceful, very capable, but yes, he's erratic, and he's certainly a risk taker. He skates close to the edge of the ice, and if he wanders off or skates off the edge of the ice, it could take a bit longer, but it will still happen. Because what they've managed to do already at this point is prove a point, that it is possible for a well-led entrepreneurial team to do things that previously it was thought that only the governments of superpowers could do, and not only that, do them in 1/3 the time, at 1/10 the cost, and even do things that they had deemed impossible altogether, in particular, making reusable launch vehicles. Now, the fact of reusable launch vehicles has two consequences. One is making space launch much cheaper, but there's another that a lot of people haven't thought much about, which is that if there are reusable launch vehicles, there will be used launch vehicles, something that we haven't had, that's been a non-thing since forever. Okay, now, as you know, new cars can be expensive, but used cars, there's an affordable used car out there for everyone. Okay, it can be 1/10 the cost of a new car, or even less. So there's going to be used launch vehicles available in quantity within a few decades, which means people are going to be able to go to Mars. And by people, I don't just mean the US government. I mean self-organized groups that want to do it, okay? And so and whether they go with a SpaceX used one or a used version of a Chinese knockoff of a Starship that they got used from Astrolidia Mexicana after 10 years of service in the intercontinental flight regime. Okay, these things are going to be around. So people are going to be able to get to Mars. Okay, and once again, not just official space program people, but all sorts of people. And all sorts of people are going to go to Mars, and they're going to have all sorts of ideas on what the ideal organization of a Mars colony should be. And that is the subject of my talk, not what the ideal will be, but the process by which this is going to be sorted out. Because the way this is going to be sorted out is not by people like us here today designing a utopia. It's going to be sorted out by these different groups on Mars competing, okay, with different ideas. Will it be socialist? Will it be libertarian? Will it be religious? Will it be atheist? Okay, et cetera, et cetera. One could go down the line. Will it be transhumanist? Will it reject that? These different ideas. So what I'm going to try to do a little bit in this talk and also in the coming book is try to investigate what will we create on Mars. Okay. Oh, there we are. And there's a lot of things to talk about here. There's the technology, yes, the economy, the political system, the social customs, the architecture. All features of Martian society are up for grabs, and they're going to be sorted out by natural selection. Okay. Also, where the colony is going to be. You know, the Mars Society had some contests over the past few years of designing first a 1,000-person Mars colony and then a 1,000,000-person Mars city-state. And between the two contests, we had 276 entries, and they had to design all aspects of the colony, and they picked about 20 different locations from around Mars. They picked locations in the north because that's where the water is. They picked locations on the equator because that's where the sunlight is. They picked locations in impact areas because that's where the minerals are, and so forth. There's a lot of different places to choose from, and that's another reason why there will be many city-states on Mars, and they'll have to trade to some degree with each other because some will have the best access to one sort of materials and others. I guess I can use this one. All right, now to be clear, okay, I said they will have access to materials. I didn't say, although I sometimes do slip into this usage, I have to admit it, I didn't say different access to different resources, okay? And the reason why I said materials and not resources is because there is no such thing as a natural resource. There's only natural raw materials. It is human creativity through this thing called technology that we create that turns materials into resources. Land was not a resource until people invented agriculture, okay? Oil was not a resource until people invented oil drilling and refining and machines that could run on the product. If you went to the general staff of Napoleon Bonaparte, who was contemplating invading some country, and they were asked to put together a list of the natural resources of the country they were invading, they would not have included oil on the list, let alone uranium. Okay? Those were not resources in 1800. Okay? Even aluminum was not discovered until 1820 and not made a practical metal until the 20th century. Okay, and just one thing to illustrate this, humans started using metals in a serious way around 6000 BC, but it wasn't until 1500 BC that they started using iron. Now, I want you to think about this. Okay, you have this long period of like 5,000 years called the Bronze Age, and and what they're using is a group of metals that collectively amount to less than 100 parts per million in the Earth's crust. That's why in the Bronze Age, metals, okay, bronze, okay, was something for aristocrats. That's why the battles in the Trojan War, the enlisted men don't count. It's all about the heroes. They've got armor. They're the only ones that can afford armor. Okay, and yet around 1500 BC, people create kilns that are hot enough to smelt iron, and now you have a metal that is 50,000 parts per million in the Earth's crust. And so now iron weapons and tools become widely available, not just for artwork or aristocratic armor, but for plows and axes and things of this sort. So, and with these tools, it becomes possible to farm in much tougher soils and cut down forests and do all sorts of things, so much more land becomes available. Okay? And then you have superior metals that don't become available, aluminum, titanium, silicon. These are 20th century metals. You go into any good Old West antique store, you will not find a single object made of aluminum. was unknown to the pioneers, okay? But it becomes possible once there's electricity, because electricity is needed to separate aluminum from aluminum oxide. So the point is that as the technique advanced, the metal resources of the world grew tens of thousands of times, okay? So once again, no such thing as natural resources, it's natural raw materials. So we need to create the technologies that will make resources on Mars. So Mars will have resources once there are resourceful people there. Okay, so first of all, there's all sorts of materials on Mars. They're present in inert forms as various oxides. To turn them into useful forms requires energy. The only thing that's going to cut it is going to be nuclear energy. Okay, first fission, including advanced forms of fission such as breeder reactors, thorium reactors, and then fusion. Mars has water on Mars is 5 times as rich in deuterium, heavy water, as Earth water is. Okay, so the Martians will have a tremendous incentive to want to develop fusion power, and I'll come back to that. Okay, the basis of the Martian economy is going to be invention. Okay, now the best analogy we have to this actually is early America. Early America, frontier America, was confronted with numerous challenges. It had a terrific shortage of labor, and so we became a culture of gadgeteers. It also had lacked means of transportation, which is why, while the British developed the steam engine, it was Americans, as early as 1787, an American demonstrated the first steamboat, which was called Perseverance, to whatever it's called, the group that was drawing up the U.S. Constitution. And the first practical steamboat, okay, was the Claremont, also developed here, and there's an actual contemporary illustration of it and the excitement it generated. And the steamboats, the reason why we needed steamboats was the only highways that early America had were rivers, and sailboats have great difficulty on rivers. But steam could go every which way. And by the way, the guy who funded funded Fulton was Robert Livingston, who is the guy that negotiated the Louisiana Purchase for Thomas Jefferson. He funded Livingston, okay? And they developed the steamboat, and the steamboat immediately led to the development of high-pressure steam engines that had more power and efficiency than Watt's engines, and this enabled railroads, which of course is the revolutionary invention of the 19th century. Totally transforms the world. Steamboats, railroads, okay? This came from that. Now the Martians, as I said, they're going to have a tremendous drive to make all kinds of inventions. One is in the area of energy, and the most plentiful material to make energy from on Mars is deuterium. It's found in water. Now, of course, there's people working on fusion here, but there's no urgency to it. On Earth, you can get energy from fossil fuels. You can get it from nuclear fission. You can get it from waterfalls and windmills and photovoltaics. Well, there's no waterfalls on Mars. The wind is thin. Solar power is weak. There's no fossil fuels. And yes, you can use nuclear energy on Mars, but it's a tremendous division of labor involved in refining fissionable fuels from minerals, whereas deuterium is much easier to separate from water, and especially if you have enriched water like they have on Mars. So Martians are going to develop fusion power. They're going to be driven to it. And guess what? Fusion power not only leads to ways to make electricity, it leads to fusion rockets. And fusion rockets can attain velocities up to 7% the speed of light, or even 10% the speed of light. So we're talking about developing the technologies that ultimately lead us to the stars. Okay? But also one other thing, as a culture of invention, inventions will be one of Mars's primary exports. That is, they will make the inventions to meet their own needs, but any invention can be licensed, can be patented and licensed on Earth, and this is one of the primary sources of income that Mars will have to pay for its necessary imports. The Martians will want to make everything that they can because of the cost of transport. So you're not going to import food to Mars. You're going to grow food on Mars. And you're going to make the glass for the greenhouses to grow the food in on Mars. And you may even make the motors and pumps that are needed to run the greenhouse on Mars. But what about the computational microcircuits that are needed to control the motors and the pumps? Those will probably be made on Earth. And so they're much less massive, but they still got to be paid for. You got to have exports. One will be IP. Another export that Mars will have will be things like food and clothing, but not to Earth, to the asteroid belt. Okay, the asteroids have incredibly rich resources of rare of platinum group metals. Okay, you probably have heard about this. Okay, now, and this stuff will be mined. But see, if you want to make money off of the gold rush, the way to do it is not to mine gold. It's to sell blue jeans to gold miners. That's how you make money off of the gold rush. Mars is going to be to the asteroid gold rush as San Francisco was to the 49ers, okay? As Seattle was to the Yukon. It's the place where the blue jeans will come from, the food will come from, okay? And the reason why it'll come from Mars is Mars has a terrific positional advantage relative to the Earth in terms of getting supplies to the asteroid belt. If you had a starship in low Earth orbit and you fueled it up, it could transport 0 cargo to the main asteroid belt. Whereas if it was in low Mars orbit, it could transport 200 tons. Okay, so Mars is as a depot for supporting the mining of the asteroids is another source of income. Okay, and a third source of income will be real estate. Okay, land is not real estate. Land is the raw material to make real estate out of. Okay, to turn land into something valuable, it needs various support needs. Well, for instance, in Colorado, where I live, you can get land very cheap that is completely undeveloped. But on the other hand, land that has electric lines and gas lines and water lines and things like this running to it can be quite valuable. So you can make a lot of money on Colorado by developing land, and then even, of course, if you put a house on the land, then you can sell an acre for vastly more than you can sell an undeveloped acre. Okay, so, and some of this will be real estate development, and some of it will be speculative. And you can see here, this is a couple being sold some land based on the idea that this is where the beachfront property is going to be after Mars is terraformed. Okay? And the wonderful thing about that is you don't know exactly where the beach is going to be. So there can be a lot of different places sold as beachfront property. But here's the thing, okay, land development of this kind frequently involves all kinds of speculation and swindles. But that was also true in the American West. But that is how the West was won. Okay, that is how capital was mobilized on the chance that some of these claims could turn out to be really valuable, and some did turn out to be really valuable. Some were in places where the railroad was going to come through. Okay, the railroad did come through somewhere. Okay, but others were not. Okay, but nevertheless, this sort of speculation has driven development on Earth, and it will do so on Mars. Okay, now, architecture. Okay, a mining outpost can look like anything, but you see, okay, a Mars city needs to be beautiful. Why? Because, well, put it this way, the Mars cities that emerge as the prevailing form of civilization need to be beautiful, because to be the ones that prevail on Mars, you need to outgrow the other cities, which means you need to be attractive to immigrants. Okay? So once again, this is a question of natural selection. You can argue for utilitarian architecture. There's a lot, I mean, the argument of efficiency is always there for the most utilitarian architecture. But if you are competing for immigrants, okay, it's important that the aesthetics be there. And this is particularly important because the question of Martian population growth will be dependent not only on the number of immigrants as such, but in particular on the number of female immigrants, okay? Because there's two ways the population can grow, either immigrants or children, and no women, no children. Mars needs women, okay? It's that simple. Now, and by the way, there's a very strong historical proof of this. You know, in the 16 and 1700s, England and France were competing for control of North America. And at that time, France had 4 times the population of England. Yet, the British colonies were being organized as communities with schools and churches and all the rest, okay? Whereas the French colonies were being organized as trading posts to make money on the beaver trade with the Indians, okay? And in consequence, British women were willing to come to North America and French women were not. And as a result of this, by 1750, when it came down to the decisive struggle between the English-speaking and the French-speaking colonists, there were 2 million English-speaking people in North America and 50,000 French. And that made the result inevitable, okay, despite the fact that, in fact, the French had more talented generals in that particular war. It didn't matter. The 2 million versus 50,000, there's only one possible outcome. And that, in other words, the war for North America was determined in the sewing circles of Bristol, okay? And so you have to have the aesthetics that will bring them over. Now, there's a variety of concepts that have been proposed, all sorts of ideas, both underground and surface concepts of cities. Some involve domes. You can't have giant, 3-mile wide domes like is sometimes in science fiction because the pressure on the inside would blow them apart. But you can have domes with diameters on the order of 100 meters or even 200 meters, and you can make networks of them, or arched situations like you see here. This is a French concept that was advanced. Other ideas involve building things into the sides of cliffs. You put a portion of the habitat underground so that most of the time people are in shielded environments, but that's okay, so long as the aesthetics of the underground world are good. I mean, how much of your time do you actually spend outside each day? Okay, so if somebody's spending 3 hours a day outside, the cosmic ray dose is reduced to 1/8 of what it would be if they were just in space or something, and that puts it well below where it matters. Okay, now, once again, I'm not proposing a utopia. I'm investigating what I think is going to prevail. Okay, and Mars colonies are going to need, or the Mars colonies that succeed will need solidarity, okay? And they will need institutions that promote solidarity. Now, there's 2 ways you can get social solidarity. You can draw your colony all from one unified group on Earth, okay? And for instance, this is the model that Israel or the Scandinavian social democracies have. I mean, they're not completely homogenous, but they really come from one general kind of people. And this can be very successful, but it's always going to be small. The other way you get solidarity is the melting pot, okay? Where you are inclusive, you can draw from all sorts of cultures, but you bring them together, e pluribus unum. And so I don't think multiculturalism will work on Mars. I don't think you can have a Mars city-state which is divided among people of diverse cultures. I think you can have a Mars city-state that is drawn from people of diverse cultures, but out of many one. And once again, this is in fact the model that built America, and it did work, and I think it will work on Mars. Now, education. Once again, the fundamental problem that Mars will have is a massive labor shortage, which means that they won't be able to afford the kind of educational system that we have here, where basically before people can engage in professions, we have them spend 12 years in the basic schools and then 4 years in college and maybe even 4 years after that getting doctorates. And it has to be said that while this system does work to a certain extent on Earth, it definitely has defects. One is, as I say, it keeps a lot of people out of the workforce. And I once heard a lecture by the famous psychiatrist, Bruno Bettelheim, who some of you may have heard of, and he was talking about why teenagers are all crazy. And he says, it's because we're keeping them as children when they already are ready to be adults, okay? And we're denying them adult-level responsibilities. And so we're keeping people in school far beyond when they need to be. And I think, I mean, look, and I can say this with freedom because I have the most advanced certificates anybody can get. I got a PhD in nuclear engineering. But the fact of the matter is an awful lot of people who get college degrees, they need to get those degrees in order to be employed, but they probably could have done their job before they had their degrees, okay? In a very large number of cases. And so the imposition of the requirement that they all have college degrees amounts to a poll tax, okay? It is saying you do not get to live among the polite people at the office until you have a college degree, okay, which involves an expensive education and 4 years of not working or not working much or so forth. It's a poll tax. And it also comes at a cost to society because it means that for those years, not only is that individual not producing anything, but society is not benefiting from that product. So I think that Mars education will be more informal, and that maybe after 8th grade, people will be working heavily in internships in various professions, and then maybe then leaving school, or if they continue on what we call college, also participating directly in research teams and so forth as members of the team. And furthermore, I mean, I have to say this, okay? Well, put it this way. The Protestant Reformation led to accelerated progress in the countries that experienced it compared to the countries that remained Catholic. And why was this? It was not because of any superiority in Protestant theology. Rather, it was because the Protestants translated the Bible into the local language. And this promoted mass literacy in those countries, which therefore promoted more rapid economic development and so forth. And in other words, what they did by translating the Bible into English and German, similar languages, Dutch, they broke down a fundamental distinction between the learned and the unlearned, okay? The learned who could read Latin and the unlearned who couldn't read anything. Instead, now everybody could read, or not everybody, but a significant fraction of the population could read in their local language, and they could participate in all the more advanced efforts of the society. I think this is what is needed now in a more general sense, is that a Martian society will want to break down the distinction between the degreed and the undegreed, between the learned and the unlearned, and you might say the whole city will be a university with lectures on not just technology, but literature or other things. And you know, our society used to be more literate than it is now. This is a photograph here of book drives for World War II soldiers. Okay, people mobilized to send books to the GIs over in Europe and in the Pacific theaters. Nobody is doing book drives for soldiers now. Okay, and it's not because they have Kindles. They weren't doing book drives before there were Kindles either. There weren't Kindles in 2003 during the Iraq War. Nobody did book drives. I think that you'll want to have the most successful Mars cities, put it this way, will have cultures that are fully intellectually alive. Okay, sports and dancing. Now, I have to tell you, I am very much an individualist. I am a person who contributes something to a Mars colony, but I'm not the ideal Mars colonist. As I say, you have a real need for social solidarity on Mars, and I'm not a person who has much interest in organized sports, let alone organized religion. Okay, but I think both of these things will be prominent in the most successful Mars colonies. And things like organized sports, community dancing, okay, these things draw people together, okay, community singing, okay, and also perhaps sports like the Iditarod in Alaska that connect people to each other by connecting them to the pioneer past. Okay, I think these may be very popular on Mars. And as far as dancing, I think jitterbug, definitely, because with low gravity it will really be something. Okay. Now, liberty. Okay. Liberty will be fundamental on Mars for two reasons. One, because the Martian colony needs to draw immigrants. And this is why I do not believe that extraterrestrial tyrannies, they're possible, but they certainly cannot become the prevailing form of society on Mars or anywhere else in space, because no one will want to emigrate to them. Okay. So they defy the growth principle. But also, the Mars will need to be free because, once again, invention will be fundamental to Mars, and freedom is fundamental to invention. Now, terraforming. What is the relationship of humanity to nature? Okay, this is a subject of much debate. It has become quite popular in recent decades to view humans as a detriment to nature, that nature is good and what people do is bad. And and this is actually a very dangerous point of view. It's an anti-human point of view. There's certainly damage that humans can do to an environment, but humans can also improve an environment. And in the case of Mars, they will demonstrably improve the environment, because it's the nature of life to take barren environments and transform them into those that are friendly to the development and propagation of life. That is why life on Earth has been a success. You know, it is life that put oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere. The early Earth did not have oxygen. It is symbiotic communities of plants and animals have created soil on the continents, and you know, any place barren that shows up immediately becomes transformed into a place that's fertile. Think of Hawaii or other islands popping out of the Pacific Ocean initially as barren places, and then become Florida, and then Polynesians show up and let loose pigs so there's something good to eat, and then Europeans show up and build hotels, and so it's a good place to check in. This is what we do, and so it would be unnatural if humans, when they go to Mars, do not attempt to transform Mars into a living environment. And we could do this. Actually, the way to do it on Mars is through global warming. We produce artificial greenhouse gases on Mars. You can warm the planet, cause massive amounts of CO2 to come out of the atmosphere that will warm it more. And then the water that's frozen into the soil will melt, and the dry riverbeds on Mars will flow again. The streams of Mars will flow again. And then you can spread plants, and you can turn this into a living world. And no, I think the Martians will be committed to this, and they'll do it. And no one will be able to look on it and not be prouder to be human. Now, I mentioned something about American history that some people here may have noticed I left something out. And here I'm going to get to the point that I left out. What, 5 minutes? Oh boy. Which is there's two ways to deal with a labor shortage. And there were two ways it was dealt with in America. One was through gadgeteering and advanced technology, which leads to high pay and encouraged immigration. The other was through slavery. Okay? So here's Lincoln. A house divided itself cannot stand. It will become all one or all the other. Now, in fact, the free states won. Okay? This is a famous painting, of course, of the surrender of the Confederates at Appomattox. And why'd they win? The easy answer is, well, the North had more population and more industry. But why did it have more population and more industry? Because it was free. That's where the immigrants went. 40% of the Union Army were immigrants of first generation in America. Only 3% of the Confederates were. And that's why the North had the bigger population, and that's why it had all the inventions, and that's why it had all the industry. Okay? So it's possible that slave cultures could be established on Mars, but they will be outgrown and outcompeted by the free ones. And then finally, I want to talk about this, okay? Because I believe that humanity right now has a choice between two futures. There is the Star Trek future, or there's the Soylent Green future. Okay? There's the open future and there's the closed future. And it's a question of the ideas. If it is accepted that this is all there is and we're going to have to fight over it, okay, then every person is fundamentally the enemy of every other person, every nation of every other nation. And the role of government is to constrain human numbers and aspirations and liberties, and to crush other governments so as to take what they have. Okay? That's where that vision goes. The other is the fact that resources are created by people. And so there's no reason killing each other, fighting over provinces, when by working together we can create planets, okay? And resources come from people, planets come from people, okay? And therefore, the role of government must be to protect human liberty at all costs, and that fundamentally, all men and women can be brothers and sisters, if you understand this. And really, that's why the cause of Mars is the cause of all nations. Thank you. I think there's time for a question or two. How do we do this? Someone have a question? Stand up. Somebody, I can't see you.
Sir, War
Yes.
of the World.
What?
War of the Worlds. Is there an irrational number of Americans still around who will just not be interested in Mars because of the history of literature that went before?
Oh, I don't think the literature of extraterrestrial invasions will dissuade people from being interested in Mars. But you see, here's the thing. The settlement of Mars, if it's done privately in the way that I've described, does not require a consensus of everyone. It only requires that a sufficiently strong in resources and talent group of people come together and decide to do it. Okay? And that's why I believe there will be a multitude of Mars settlements created by different groups with different ideas. Some might like socialist ideas, some might like libertarian ideas. Okay? And as I said earlier, some might like transhumanist ideas and others might view them as horrifying. But it will be put to the test. Sir?
I've seen some ideas about terraforming where their theories were to build a magnetosphere around Mars. Is that feasible, like where we could build a magnetoshield or either build a ring around the planet?
I don't think it's feasible, but I don't think it's necessary. The people who say that you need to have a magnetosphere to have an atmosphere are wrong. Venus has no magnetosphere. It has a very strong atmosphere. So we don't need to create a magnetosphere in order to terraform Mars.
Thank you.
Sir?
How much money is it going to cost per person to get from Earth to Mars?
I didn't quite catch that.
How much money is it going to cost to take a person on Earth and transport them to Mars?
How much money will it cost? It depends who's doing it, okay? But actually, if you run the numbers, once we have reusable rockets, it will be possible to move from Earth to Mars at a cost in today's equivalent money on the order of several $100,000. Okay, not hundreds of billions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Okay, which by the way is comparable in cost to what it could to travel from England to America in the 1600s. Okay, if you think about the people, the working men who had to get their passage paid for by being indentured servants for 7 years. Think of 7 years' salary for a working man. Well, that's kind of like $300,000 today, right? Okay, that's what it cost to get someone to pay your travel. Okay, and people did it. All right, if you were someone with some means, if you owned a farm, you could sell it and pay for your passage that way. Just like if you're a middle-class person today, you could probably, if you could sell your house, you could put together several $100,000. You know, if you needed to move to another planet, willing to cash in all your chips, that's the kind of money you can raise. So I do think it will become economically possible for private individuals to pay for their way to Mars. And I think the way they'll do it, by the way, is they'll buy the used Starship. Elon Musk told me, I know Musk, he told me that he could produce the upper stage Starships, the one that would actually travel to Mars, for around 10 million each. And that means that either he or one of his Chinese competitors would probably be willing to sell them for 20 million each, which means that used ones will probably be available for 3 million each, okay? And it transports 100 people. So $3 million divided by 100 people is what, like $30,000 each, okay? That's, okay, it's not cheap, but it's the kind of money people could come up with if they wanted to move, and they're buying the ship. Okay, so they get to keep it on Mars, either as starter housing or to sell to people who want to mine asteroids. Okay, I think I'm out of time. I'm not sure. Okay. All right, thanks.